71. Good? Okay, so this is, like I said, a Sichah, part of the project Likkutei Sichos this week. Page 71. Chelik Zayin, on Pesach. Aleph. De Yom Tov Pesach werd angerufen mit 3 Namen, Terim. In Teresh Bachsar wird angerufen Chag HaMatzis. In Nusach HaTfilah hat ein Kevegem zugegeben, Chag HaPesach Hazeh, Zman Cheruseinu, Gimel, Rosh Hashanah, und Azei, in Lashon Bnei Adam wird euch alle 7, 8 Tag angerufen mit dem Namen Chag HaPesach. So we find in the holiday of Pesach we have 3 names. The Torah calls it Chag HaMatzis, which is the festival of matzahs. In davening we say it's called Zman Cheruseinu, which is the time of our freedom, and the rabbis called it all 7 or 8 days Chag Pesach, and this is how it's commonly called. V'shleimar as Yom Tov hat an akuda klalis und tegen ikri. Und die Likkutei anhalt 3 Inyanim, welche wird ausgedrückt in die 3 der Montenamen. So the general point and fundamental message of the Yom Tov has 3 parts which are conveyed by these 3 names. In other words, Chag HaMatzis, Zman Cheruseinu, and Chag Pesach all have a connection between each other. The Bala say there in Teda is Eich Teda Hira Kumteis as die 3 Namen von Zer Inyanim Veiros kommen Leuten Seder von Zer Cheshivah. So the order of Teda, which we know Teda is also a lesson. It's these 3 names and the way they appear in order of their respective have an importance. Zum ersten kommt der Inyan von Chag HaMatzis. Was ist der Name von Teda Shebachsab? So the first name, the most important name, is what Torah calls it, Chag HaMatzis, the holiday of matzahs. Danach kommt der Inyan von Zman Cheruseinu. Was ist Matveya Shitavu Chachamim, Anshik Neses Hagdela, zu sagen ist Betfilah. And then you have the name that the Chachamim called it, which is Man Cheruseinu, time of our freedom. Danach Chag HaMatzis, was is angenommen der Namen in Lashon Hazal, Lashon Bnei Adam. This is the common name that the Chachamim and most people call it. This is called Pesach, Chag HaPesach. Base. There's Manfi Yitzias Mitzrayim is K'mayim B'Nevuos Yecheskel Leidas Am Yisrael. The time that the Yidden left Mitzrayim, as the Navi calls it, this is the birth of Am Yisrael. The Tam was is Mitar mit Lashon Leida. Why do we call it? Or nit nur is nit nur weil dem hat es gewähnt die Zeit, wenn Yidden seine geworden a Volk. Was das passt zu sagen, ich bin ein andere Völker. So when you say this is the time that the Yidden were born, this is the time of the birth of the Jewish nation. So it's not only because that's when the Yidden became a nation, because you could say that on other nations as well. Nor weil während die Volk sein Yidden durch dem verwandelt geworden in einer Metzias Chadashas. Because the Yidden, the Jewish people, became a nation, they were transformed into a new entity. The Tachlis and Kavanah and Shlemus from Yitzias Mitzrayim is Matan Teda, Commission Emmer, B'Yitziachas Am Mitzrayim Tavnas Elikim Al Harazeh. The reason why Hashem, what's the Tachlis, why Hashem took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, is, as the pasuk says, that when you will take the people out of Mitzrayim, you will serve Hashem on this mountain. Was das ist einer von den Biyurim, für was Chag HaShavuos man Teresenu wird bestimmt durch Zählen Sheva Shabbasos von Machar Pesach. This is one of the reasons why on the day on which we celebrate Shavuos, which is the time of the giving of the Torah, how do we determine that? Is counting 7 weeks from the 2nd day of Pesach. L'hoiris, Shavuos man Torah is a Hemshech from Yitzias Mitzrayim, Leilas Am Yisrael, is to show that Shavuos is a continuation of the of Yitzias Mitzrayim, which Yitzias Mitzrayim, as we said, is the birth of the Jewish nation. Let's say, so what does that mean? Leidas Am Yisrael is verbunden mit dem, was sie wären a Teda Volk. Der ganze Mahus von Yidden, Oich als a Yochid is Teda, which means that the birth of the Jewish people is becoming a nation, is their entire essential character of the Jews is for Teda. Und die Metzias Chadasha ist nicht nur der Fall, was in Golos Mitzrayim seinen Yidden gewähnt, in Ashofel Amatz B'Yesu und seinen Bemele Mitzad Atzam nicht gewähnt, kein Kelim aufzunehmen Teda, Vadrab, seien die Gememta Shari Tuma, is Matzav gewähnt, Benigat zu Teda Kedusha. So the Jewish people became this new Metzias Chadasha, not only because they reached such a lowly state in Mitzrayim that they were unfit to receive the Torah. Moreover, since they were in their 49 gates of impurity, they were not amicable to receive the Torah. Be'ikar mitzadem, was Torah is etzle amen shashum, chem begnuse shknuse loch. Sie ist in ganzen Hecher von Ivroim. Und der Fahr ist bei Jiden, wie sie sein Lamata, und dazu noch in Mitzrayim, given adavar chodesh legamri. Es ist nicht in Zeir together. Rather, more importantly, is Torah is as we know, this is like the prodigy of Hashem. It's His delight, a hidden treasure that was concealed for you. Torah is entirely beyond the realms of created beings. And for the Yidden and people living down here in this world, living in Mitzrayim, the Torah was too sublime to relate to. And it was basically it was beyond the outside gather of a Yidden, of anybody. Damit werden nusber die drei Nemen, Chag HaMatzis, Chag Zman Cheresenu und Chag HaPesach. Sie drückt aus die drei Tnuis und dem Seder Davke, was fordert sich die aufzutan am Messias Chadasha. So on this, now we can explain the three names, Chag HaMatzis, Zman Cheresenu, and Chag HaPesach, is they amplify three steps in this specific order that allow the Jews to become a new entity. So what's the idea of Mitzrayim? The idea of leaving Mitzrayim is becoming a Messias Chadasha. How do you become a Messias Chadasha? Is through Torah. And these three names are going to bring out Chag HaMatzis, Zman Cheresenu, and Pesach is going to bring out this idea of becoming a Messias Chadasha. So the Rebbe says in Gimel, wat man das verstehen durch der Dogma von dem Seder, wie Rav lernt mit der Talmud, Advar Sechel, zu welcher der Talmud allein mit sein eigenem Sechel kann nicht zukommen. Es ist bei ihm Advar Chodesh, nicht weil hat bis nicht gehört, nur weil es ist Hecher von Gedar Sechel shel Talmud. So understand this by the analogy to a teacher which imparts to the student a concept that the student, when he uses his own intellectual capabilities, cannot grasp. Why? This student, this idea from his teacher is a total chiddush, not because the student has been unfamiliar with the idea, but rather because the idea was beyond the student's intellectual capabilities. The erste Sach man sich bei der Talmud atnuf in Bittel. Gemeimer Azal, als bei der Talmud Chochem, Sheyeshel Fnei Rabbi, darf sein Sif Neitvis Mar, Meridas Machmas Ema. So the first thing is that we demand from the student that he has to have bittul, he has to have surrender. As the Chachamim say, a Talmud Chacham who sits before his teacher, his lips must drip with mir, with like bitterness, out of a sense of reverence. Warum? Mit seiner Keches und Sechel kann nicht aufnehmen dem Sechel Chodesh, weil ist Hecher von seinem Metzies, darf gebitteln, nicht Metzies, a Kli auf dem, weil der Lashon Chazal, Kli Deken Machsen. This is Machzik. This is because if he uses his own capabilities, his own abilities and intellect, the student will not be able to grasp because he's a Metzies. And since it's about him, he's getting in the way of this great intellect. Dafka, when he has the bittul, negating the sense of self, he can become a keli, as the Gemara says, an empty vessel. That's what holds. Kli rekan machzik, kli mali einin machzik. That's what the Gemara in Bracha says. So the first thing is, the Talmud has to have.
The rabbi has to go down to his level.
Correct. Yeah. If the Talmud really wants to understand what the rabbi is saying, the first thing is that he has to have bittul. He has to have surrender. And then zusammen damit danach aber muss sich der Talmud mishtadel sein, zu übernehmen die Svara, was auf dem muss nutzen sein Sechel, sein Metzies. And then afterwards, the student has to exert himself to grasp the concept, and at this stage he has to utilize his intellect and sense of self. Zusammen damit, was darf Kli Rekan Machzik, muss es aber sein, a Kli, und a Kli Shalom, mitok, in Nekev HaMavatel, and Yonah. Yes, you have to have bittul, you have to have an empty vessel, but you have to have a vessel, you have to have a Kli in order to be Machzik. If you're not going to have a Kli Shalom, then you're not going to be able to hold anything. Und der Rebbe ist es nicht genug, die Tnuah von bittul, and therefore it's not enough just to have the Tnuah of am bottle, nor es darf sein, die Zugetrogenkeit zu Kabal Sechel, a Kli am Makabel Machzik. But you have to be able to retain what the person or what the Rav is saying, So you have to make yourself a keli that holds and retains what's placed in it. The tachlis von limud is safe. So der Talmud sein koi inish daite der Rebbe. Und der Rebbe Chotsch, es ist in sein Chotsch as in begettet zu verstehen daite der Rebbe. Now, what's the ultimate? The ultimate is, as it says, that you should come to the understanding of what the Rav says. You should be able to grasp at full what the Rav is saying, even though you're not holding at that level. Was der Rebbe muss der Rav mashpia sein dem Talmud as seichel mit tzumtzum, was ist be'erech zum seichel Talmud, und dem emek as seichel, the er is beim Rav, is behelim in dem seichel mit tzumtzum. That's why the teacher, what he has to do is he has to condense and simplify the lesson in accordance with the student's intellect, and then obviously he gives the full depth of the seichel as it's conceived in the teacher's mind. It remains concealed within the condensed version of the idea of the teacher of the seichel. Darf aber beim Talmud sein dem Tnua zu Areisgehen von der Medida Vagbala von sein Seichel und aufheben sein Seichel zum Seichel Arab. Und darf durch dem kann safe zukommen zu sein Koya Dati der Rabbi, was ist ein ganz nachher Sug Seichel. And the student has to constantly try to break out of the constraints and limitation of his own seichel, elevating his seichel to that of his teacher. Specifically, in this way, a student will eventually be able to fully grasp his teacher, which we know is an entirely higher sort of intellect than his own. That's the kavanah. So you have to have bittul. You have to have also a kli shalim. There has to be. You can't just say bittul not and put away everything, because then you won't understand a thing. And then the ultimate is to come to adaiti to Rebbe. Daled. If them say that now, as früher kommt der sifsesiv mar neitzus mar bittul und danach die Tnua zu sein akli mitzias, kann man nachher fragen. Now, this that we're saying, that first you have to have the idea of bittul, and afterwards you should forge himself into a keli, an entity. So nachher you can ask a question. The Gemara sagt, as Rabbi mekamei the pasuk l'rabanan amar milsed dichusa botch rabanan l'seif Yosef be'emso pasuk b'shmaita. Was von dem sagt man, as früher darf aufgekutan werden dem niftach libam, sein akli hero, zu können verstehen die Schmeitze, und erst danach Yosef be'emso yire bittul. So the Rebbe says that the Gemara says, and Spartan and Tanya, Rabba or Rava, began his lecture. Before he would begin his lecture, he would say a joke. He would say a humorous remark, and that would cheer his students. And afterwards, he sat in serious earnestness and began his drasha.
So are you saying here that first you have to make a keli and then is the bittul?
So that's the Rebbe is asking. The Rebbe says, "Is the the student's heart has to be open, which means that he must be made into a keli capable of understanding the teacher, and only afterwards do we demand that it should be ema b'yira." So the cheder, we see that there's a step before the bittul, before the ema b'yira. The Rebbe says the beer and them, the even from milsav dichusa was darv zayin mekameh the pasuk l'rabanan is nor achana klalisim klalis alimud. We're not talking about the actual limud. We're talking about the preparation to the limud. Thus is aber nicht a tail from them limud. It's not a part of the learning. For them say the hashpah the gufa, the way that the hashpah comes. Now, what does that mean? In other words, das was the milsav dichusa darf uftan in dem Talmud is nicht zu machen im roi zu aufnehmen dem seichel, nor zu peil sein, as so bechlal wellen sein mekabel, sein mekabel, as sein seichel bechlal so stehen in atnu von Kabbalah. Rabbi did not engage in this humor in order to enable students to grasp the instructions. Rather, he did so in order to arouse their desire to absorb his teaching, in order that they should bechlal want to have a rotzen to be mekabel hashpah. Aber der Jachas bescheichas erich zwischen dem Rav und Talmud, was ist verbunden mit der Hashpas HaSeichel zum Talmud, schafft sich erst, wenn Yosef be'emso und Pesach b'shmeitza. The relationship between a teacher and a student, which enable the teacher to actually relate the svara to the student, that is dafka when there's aim of a yira. Hey, Light and beer wird euch sein verstandig, dem Seder in the Maimer Chazal, based on this, we could also understand and appreciate this, that what Chazal say, always let the left hand push away and the right hand draw near. Was in dem Seder Lashon is mashmas la olam dar frier sein small deich und danach mimim mekareves, which comes out, which implies that the first thing is the left hand has to push away, and then the right hand draws near. Und die Adgoshe in the Maimer is nor as der deiche darf getan werden mit dem small yad kea und mekareves mit nimin, which means that the Chachamim wish to emphasize only that should a person need to push individuals away, and they have to tell him off or chastise him, that the person should push others only with his left, his weaker hand, and draw them near with his right hand. So the Rebbe says, "Kem derofreg," and we can ask the same question. K'delil, wie stimmt denn Seder mit den Maimer Hanal? As mekamei de Pesach lehu, Omer milsib dichos atnofen mekareves l'sev yosef me'emso atnu mehaftet. You can ask the same question. How does this order conform with the other in the above quote that we said before Rabbi would begin his teaching? He would say a humorous remark, which that is an act of drawing near. Afterwards, he said in seriousness, which is the opposite approach. We say you should be small decha. Oy chesakla zimim kedemes l'smel, und da is smell freer human. Additionally, we have a general rule: the right always given precedence to the left. Why here does the left precede the right? The Rebbe says the kasha is noch starker. The question is even stronger. Noch ein Maimer le'elim tehei wird gebracht jetzt yetinik v'isha tiyismel deicha v'yimim mekareves. Following the statement that always the left hand, the Gemara says when dealing with the Yetzirah, or the inclination towards procreation or a child or a woman, the left hand should push away the right hand, should draw near. And their seder by Atinik is as medarfim mizar zayin zum lernen mit dvarim shem ayavim as they lekatnish shanav. The seder is that by a child, we have to encourage the child with age-appropriate items, something the child will appreciate. Karavet and the chagezim, the Rambam is marich in the Pirush Mishnayos. You have to give him treats. It's the iPhone here. You have to give him things that the child will appreciate. As the Rambam says, you tell a child, read, I'll give you nuts. And as the Rambam says in Pirush Mishnayos, for dem is verstandig, als bei Atinik darf kommen die Yemin mekareves fahren small decha. Und wie man sagt, es bemochash, als eben soll zugehen, zu Atinik früh mit small decha, kann es den ganzen wegstupen von lernen. So what do we see from here? We see that the child, you have to draw the child first with the right, and that has to come before the left. Because if you're going to use small decha first, the child will probably become ganz and not interested in learning. I know in camps, the Bachram, they think that you have to scare the kids the first day. It's like and why do they do it? Because that's how we were taught in camp. And why do they do it? Because that's how they were taught it. You have to use small decha. But Pianal, Sivdal, this is moving. Based on Sivdal, we can explain. The Maimer le'elim tehei that sich nor wegen dem wie es darf sein dem Seder in dem Uftan bepel öfen Zulas. Und in dem Seder, as früher kommt smell decho, or danach, im mekareves kanal siv gimon hey. Because this that you have to have the left hand push refers only to when you're actually influencing the other person, so you use small decha. So that's a chabada. Nit wegen die pula von yamin mekareves. Here, we're not speaking about the activities where the right draws the near. Was kommen als achane muchrachas und akdam es kedem von der Ashba. As if Amiras milsed blichusa, fahrt Talmidim other tutsuin dem Talmud got them mit dvarim shem evim etzlei. Here we're talking about not the actual hashba, but the preparation before beginning to educate the child, like making a joke or engaging with youngsters by giving them things that they appreciate. Okay, well,